There isn't a peanut butter approach you can take to leading. It is very situational specific. It's very person specific. And, he mistook kind of the friendship as being able to get away with not doing things, not communicating well, etc. And so, we really had to reestablish those boundaries and really talk through that. So you don't necessarily need to end friendships, but you need to establish the appropriate boundaries and do that early on.
Welcome to another episode of Going Beyond the Title from Individual Contributor to Leader, where we interview leaders on the subject of leadership and the specific area of transitioning from a individual contributor. I'm your host, Michael Scarponi. Today's guest is Alpen Khatri. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you did.
Okay, good. Alpen is the principal of AK Operational Work and currently is Director of Supply and Operations for Harm Reduction Therapeutics. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got it
Okay,
right.
good. I always not sure. Welcome to the show, Alvin. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So let's start by how did you get into this work?
Yeah, so I spent about 20, 25 years in various roles in supply chain. And then probably 5, 6 years ago, I landed a consulting, working as a W-2 consultant for a company. And really just enjoyed, the gratification of working with clients and, being able to solve problems. And so 2, 3 years ago, I decided to go independent so I could kind of pick and choose some of the clients and project work I do. But it's really just being able to go in, identify issues, challenges with the client, and being able to help solve them.
Okay, great. For those of folks that might be watching this that aren't familiar with supply chain, can you briefly describe it?
Yeah, I mean, supply chain, it's been a lot in the news lately, but I think, it's a very, very broad term. It covers all of the activities required to move goods. That can entail the raw materials, supplies, ordering of supplies, the management of inventory and goods, production planning, then logistics and transportation, storing and moving of materials, and then working on demand to kind of drive each of those buckets. And then, in the recent past, they've added kind of customer service because all of these things, at the end of it, the customer's impacted. So really, customer service has now become kind of part of that supply chain spectrum.
Got it. So you go from raw materials all the way to delivered goods, right?
Correct.
And everything in between. In thinking about your career, what's a accomplishment that you're especially proud of?
Yeah, good question. I think, in the current past, I started consulting really because of just the joy I feel from helping clients succeed. But my current client, I think you mentioned Harm Reduction Therapeutics, I'm pretty proud to be part of that team. We're helping deliver a life-saving Narcan alternative called Revive.
Mm,
It really helped expand access to an underserved population, really to help fight the opioid epidemic. Additionally, this is unique in the life science pharma space where this company is a 501(c)(3). So very much, the mission
interesting.
really is about improving access, and it's not about making money, but it's really about helping save lives. So I'm particularly
Yeah.
proud of that.
For folks that aren't familiar, 501(c)(3) is a nonprofit, stands for a nonprofit organization. I love that you're doing this work. It is life saving, and I'm disappointed that you have to do this work. Right?
Yeah.
Uh, on the other side of the coin, what's a mistake that you've learned from in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think we connected because we want to talk about kind of the growth from a transition from an individual contributor to a leader. And one thing I've learned kind of early in my career is there isn't a peanut butter approach you can take to leading. It is very situational specific. It's very person specific. So really kind of understanding the situation, the task, the person's important. There's been cases where I've misjudged a person's skill level or capabilities, and the approach may not have fit. So I mean, I think early on, I think that's something I've learned and adapted to.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to talk about making that transition in a second. And you're right, it's not a peanut butter approach. I wish it were, but
Yeah.
it's not, It's situation specific. For those folks that are entering into a leadership position from having been an individual contributor, what's a piece of advice that you would give them?
Yeah, I mean, I think usually someone moving from an individual contributor to a leadership role has generally been successful as an individual contributor, right? So they've learned to build relationships, they've learned to communicate, they've learned to do the appropriate analytics. at times I can give a false sense of confidence walking into a leadership role because it is a different skill set. So really, kind of taking that bigger picture view of direct reports, really understanding skills, capabilities, organizational goals, and really helping drive that down is important versus the individual mindset, individual contributor mindset is I'm good at this, I can do this, and I'll do it, and it'll help me, right?
Yeah. The biggest challenge that we've seen is people going from who have been individual contributors working with their peers into a leadership role and still trying to be friends with their peers. I don't know if you've seen that, but how does somebody wade through that water from going from a peer, you sit around and talk about what you did last Saturday night to a leader?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. You have to draw that those boundaries clearly. Early in my career, I worked in manufacturing, and I worked in a different department and was friends with someone that got promoted to an assistant manager role after I transitioned into his department, but we were friends prior, and so he ended up being a direct report where I was helping develop him as an assistant manager. And he mistook kind of the friendship as being able to get away with not doing things, not communicating well, etc. And so we really had to reestablish those boundaries and really talk through that collectively just to make sure we're on the same page. And you have to really address those things early in the process. You don't necessarily need to end friendships, but you need to establish the appropriate boundaries and do that early on.
Yeah. So a lot of times in leadership, we bring in our beliefs. What belief did you have about leadership that you had to let go of?
Yeah, I think kind of like I said in the beginning, as an individual contributor, I kind of mentioned, there's a false level of confidence. I have, a lot of confidence in my analytical abilities and analytical skills, but being a leader, you can't do all the analytics, all the analysis for everyone you're reporting to. If you're doing that, you're doing all the work and you're not teaching, you're not developing, you're not creating an organization that can work on its own. So it's really taking that step back of, yes, being a doer is great, but also being able to teach and make someone else do is important as well.
Yeah. One of the things that, again, in my travels, a lot of, well, how do we say, newbie leaders tend to do the work themselves because number one, they feel they could do it faster. Number two, they can feel they do it better. But what happens in that process is that you create a dependency that people now expect you to do it. Right.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but
Yeah, absolutely. I think it creates really inertia, right, in the organization. You can't really get things accomplished there. You're creating your own bottleneck.
yeah,
Uh,
how'd you overcome that?
I think again, I think when you run into those situations, it's important. And I think I tried early on of trying to walk people through how I would approach it, but maybe not doing it that way. Helping establish here's the framework I would use. Now you try it and come talk to me, or even better, let's talk through how you would do it and then work on a collaborative approach versus just doing. And again, I think I made the mistake early on of doing a lot of doing and then kind of adjusting as I saw the patterns. I think identifying the patterns and changing the patterns quickly is important. So, identifying, hey, this person keeps coming to me. He's not doing the stuff. He's asking me to do it for him and really changing that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's great. And when you start pushing back, people get a little, wait a minute here.
Yeah.
This is not how we're supposed to play the game. When you stepped into a leadership position, which new beliefs did you have to adopt?
I think I'd say, and I think, when we first connected and talked about this, I talked a little bit of the challenges of working in a matrix organization. And early on, I was an individual contributor in a matrix organization. And while I understood kind of the department goals, I was also being pulled in the direction of the product team goals and having to kind of juggle both of those. And then certainly placing a greater weight on the product group goals because that's where 85, 90% of my day-to-day interaction was, who I was working with directly. So it's a larger impact to my performance. I think kind of switching into a leadership role in that same matrix organization where now my goal shift is more on that kind of corporate department level goal. It was certainly a fundamental change in really digging in deeper in how this helps the company versus the group, and then how do you kind of marry that with the individual contributors so that they can buy into that as well. And it was a challenge, but certainly it took me first buying into it myself. If that
Yeah,
makes
got
sense.
it. When you think about leaders in the past that you especially have looked up to, including your leadership skills, what would you say defines a really effective leader? What are the skills that they need?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really effective leader has to be able to articulate the vision, what the goals are, and it's funny because like I used to get frustrated as an individual contributor or when you'd hear the same messaging over and over. But then
Yeah.
when you became that leadership role, you kind of understood if you don't say the same thing over and over, it doesn't resonate. So so I think a good leader has to be able to articulate the vision, be consistent in articulating that vision over and over, really being able to establish guardrails and oversight without kind of micromanaging. I think those are key as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The everything that I've read and everything I believe starts with that vision element, right? And having a clear picture in your head about where you want to get your team to. Without that, things just kind of can fall apart very easy, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, what helped you develop those skills in leadership?
I think probably, like I said, I think I had one particular leader who I think was very good, very laser focused on being able to articulate that vision and really kind of drive that. And then having the dialogue of, hey, what do we need to do to get there? And, taking the inputs from everyone and driving it. So I think having exposure to that really helped develop me into kind of adopting some of those same practices as well. And I think that stuck with me.
First of all, how big is the company you're currently in?
The current company, we are all consultants, independent contractors. So there's only one or two full-time employees, a CEO and COO, and
Okay.
probably five, six contractors
Okay,
doing.
so it's fairly small. We've talked about the skills that prepare you to be an effective leader. What are the things that you've seen in your career that really have identified the poor leaders? What are some of the things that they do that
Yeah, I think
you
I
go,
think
yikes?
yeah, I think there's a handful of things. Not being clear in vision, like we talked about, is important as well. But
Yep.
also, I think very much focused on the negative feedback, not the positive feedback. Quick to judge. I think those are big things. I think micromanagement, certainly inconsistency in communication, messaging. One day it's this, one day it's that. It's a lot of reactiveness. And interestingly, I think when I've seen this, it generally isn't because the person's a poor leader. It ends up being more of a corporate culture that drives poor leadership. The way things happen top down then drive that same behavior at the leadership managerial level.
Yeah. I've seen that constantly in organizations where the leader has not been in charm school. And barks orders at people, especially when sales are off, and subsequently, rolls downhill, right?
Yeah.
That other
Now
people
you
start
bring up a
barking at their
sorry,
team.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I say you bring up a good point. It's easy to be a good leader when things are going well, right? But it's when things aren't going well and how good of a leader you are.
Yeah, yeah, and I think for a lot of senior leaders, when sales are down, it we press the panic button, and we press the panic button because the survival of people, real payroll, etc., is contingent upon making a certain number of widgets a day or a week, a month, whatever it might be. Yeah. What I have seen, and I don't know if you're familiar with continuous improvement and lean processes. A famous consultant Drucker said, 90% of all problems are systems oriented and only 10% are people oriented. And a lot of times, what we see in organizations is that when things are a little tentative, right, we tend to focus on the people stuff and really not attend to the system stuff. I don't know if you've been involved with continuous improvement or lean processes, if you could speak to that at all, if you've seen changes in organizations because of adapting that strategy.
Yeah, I won't say that I've been in a organization that's really big on driving continuous improvement. But yeah, I can kind of give you an example of, there's kind of three legs: people, process, and tools, right? You have to manage all three, and I think that's kind of the concept. I can give you an example in my career where I went through an acquisition, and I stayed on through the acquisition in a role. And the model is for a C-store chain, so we went from kind of a corporate model to a regional model. So in the corporate model, we had people that specialize in very specific kind of skill sets. 30, 40 people managing a large footprint of stores or retail locations, and then we went to a much smaller regional model where we had 2 to 3 resources doing everything for a smaller base of stores. I was able to retain, rock stars that were very specialized. And so, we were able to work through the transition. It wasn't fun or easy, but we were able to work through that transition, very intelligent people that were able to kind of adapt and be able to do that sort of thing. But then over time, the organization didn't necessarily fit their skill set because they'd found an organization that had career pathing that worked this way. They did great, but it just didn't fit where they wanted to be career wise. Yes, we survived through this transition, but then we had to go through and manage through turnover because the organization no longer fit where they wanted to be from a career growth perspective. So now, when you're recruiting in new analysts to kind of fill that role, the expectation has to be very different because I was working with the cream of the crop, the rock stars that had worked in very specialized roles and understood, and asking people without any industry experience to now come in and be a generalist and do that exact same thing. And so in the process, really had to revisit a lot of the tools, the processes we're doing to make it more sustainable, because otherwise you'd be fighting this kind of constant turnover battle because it didn't fit. And so you got to look at the three legs: the people, process, and tools, right? So now the people have
Mhm.
changed, so the process and tools have to change to support that. And so, I'd say from a continuous improvement perspective, certainly did a lot of those things: simplifying processes, building better visibility to help drive decision making, that sort of thing.
Got it. Let's go back to that question about challenges. Any further thoughts on biggest challenges leaders stepping into that new role as facing?
I think the challenge is really it's twofold, right? It's, like we've talked about, it's understanding the overall vision goal, understanding your people and tools, and making sure it fits.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else that you want to say about this topic? I know we could talk about it for hours on end, but thoughts about leadership or stepping into individual into a leader role or organizational dynamics or any of the above?
No, I mean, I think we've covered kind of the gambit. But I do think, just to kind of reiterate, understanding who you're working with, what you've got is important, but also balancing, especially, bulk of my career, I'd say, has been kind of middle management. So you have to learn to manage up and manage down. And, those take two different skill sets.
Yeah, tell me before you sign off here. Tell me about managing up. I mean, we don't talk about that a lot. We usually talk about managing down. But what do you found?
Yeah.
What have you found effective to managing up in organizations?
I think it's a reflection of how well your leader is to how effectively you can manage up,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Right. So,
That's right. If
yeah.
there's a brick wall there, you ain't getting through.
Right, exactly. If you've got that leader that's giving you the clear vision, you know exactly how to manage up because you know exactly what they want, how they want to see it, how to
Yeah,
articulate it. If
yeah,
not, then it's a challenge, right? You've got to be able to adapt to the idiosyncrasies, but also kind of deliver what they want.
yeah, yeah. I really want to thank you for your time.
Yeah,
Appreciate it. And if people want to get in touch with you, how might they do that if they have further questions?
yeah, absolutely. They can reach me at my email. It is a Khatri, Khatri, at akoperationalconsulting.com.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd be glad to continue the conversation with anyone that's interested
Excellent.
and
And
wants to listen to me.
you're also on LinkedIn, so people might
Yeah,
uh,
that might be easier actually. Yeah, so yeah, look
connect
me up
you
on
either
LinkedIn,
way.
Alpen Khatri.
Again, many thanks. I appreciate your time and your wonderful insights. I know that people watching this will get a lot that they could take away and think about as a result of your experience. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I enjoyed the
Uh,
conversation.
you're very welcome. This is Mike Scarponi, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Going Beyond the Title from Individual Contributor to Leader.